the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Anthony in Albuquerque. Good morning, Anthony.
I mean, basically just kind of what came out of the Vatican today. It's just kind of got me, for the first time in my life, it's just got me questioning everything, and if I want to stay with the church, I kind of appreciate where you're coming from your perspective and not being negative and wanting to attack, but I'm just depressed and just kind of, was just calling you to tell you where I came from and just looking for some direction.
I'd be happy to give you some thoughts on that, Anthony. And I understand that it's a strange time in the life of the church, and things are happening and being said and done that are, at the very least, for many people, they're confusing, they're discouraging, they're perplexing. And let's acknowledge that. This is a time in the church that is different from how it was, let's say, during the reign of Pope Pius XII, for example. So we're in the middle of something that we haven't experienced before, but here's what I would encourage you to do. Number one, think of yourself with the apostles in the boat. And you know this story from the Gospels where they were on the Sea of Galilee and a storm came up. And a number of them, of course, were professional fishermen. So they knew about storms and they had been in storms and they were okay with dealing with weather like that. This was beyond anything they had experienced, to the point where they were convinced that they were all about to drown because the waves were so big and the wind was so strong that they believed that the ship was about to go under and they would all die. And the most remarkable thing about this incident is that Jesus was with them in the boat asleep. He was asleep. His head, we're told, was resting on a cushion in the back of the boat. And so they wake the Lord and they say to him, "Lord, don't you care? Don't you realize we are about to die? Don't you care?" And Jesus rises and he says, "Why did you doubt, O you of little faith?" And he calms the storm. So just as suddenly as from one moment to the next, they thought that it's over, we're done, that we're going down and we're all going to die. And Jesus is asleep and he doesn't care. And then he calms the winds and the waves. Everything goes back to normal. The sun comes back out again. And he says, "Why did you doubt, O you of little faith?" Now, I can see why they doubted from a human standpoint, because they were at the brink of death. And yet, Jesus was with them. So I take a lot of encouragement, and I hope you will too, Anthony, in that passage, because there are moments where it sure seems like that, doesn't it? But if you keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, we can acknowledge the problems. We can acknowledge this is weird. This sure doesn't fit with what we know to be true. And at the same time, though, you can still be faithful and persistent in the middle of the storm, knowing ultimately you're not a Catholic because of the Pope. You're not a Catholic because of your bishop or your priest or me or Father Rocky or any. You're a Catholic because that's the church Jesus established. And you're in the church because you want to be with him. And that's how I would look at it. And that's how I do look at it. Where if you're tempted to jump ship and find a place where it's not so messy or not so discouraging, all you're really doing is hurting yourself by leaving the church that Jesus established, which happens to be in a storm right now,
No, and I appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense. Using that passage from the gospel, and just real quick, other than prayer, what can we do as Catholics other than prayer? Obviously, you're right on that. I don't know, I hate to use the word make our voices heard, but to sort of move the needle. You know what I mean?
I do. I have a theory about that. It's actually more than a theory, but I have a conviction on this point. And so hear me out on this one. You and I are Americans, and we have grown up in a culture which has become so accustomed to fixing things. And we feel as though if we just get out there and demonstrate or sign a petition or publicly do this, that, or the other, that we'll fix things. But we're talking here about the church that Jesus established 2,000 years ago, and our American instinct to fix it, to shout loud enough in loud enough numbers that's alien to the church that Jesus established. And it's not a democracy. We don't have a vote. And so this is where I think a lot of people, they go off the deep end because they think in a misguided way that if they just sign enough names to a petition, or they shout loud enough, or they demonstrate out in front of a bishop's meeting, or they hoop and holler, or they do YouTube videos, or they do blogs, or they write books, or any of the other things, that somehow they are in charge of fixing the problem. It doesn't work that way. It's never worked that way. Jesus is the head of the church, and he arranged it in such a way that his appointed ministers, the bishops, and to a lesser extent, the priests, that they are the ones who make these kinds of decisions. Sometimes they make bad decisions. Sometimes they make excellent decisions. And the thing that you and I are called to do, and this I think is the answer to your question, what do? Pray, trust Jesus, know the faith, read the Gospels, know what Jesus taught, know what the church has always taught. Don't be buffeted by the winds that blow in different directions, because that'll change. Things come and things go, people come and people go. The church remains the same. And keep your eyes fixed on Christ. Don't get discouraged. Don't let the people out there who traffic in denouncing popes and bishops and things like that, don't let them get you down. Keep in mind that for many of them, that's how they make their living. And there's a kind of outrage machine that only runs if you get enough people outraged. So there's a certain vested interest in some quarters. My advice would be to avoid that. Not because you don't want to know what's going on. You can still know what's going on. But to entrust it into the hands of Jesus. Lord, if it's good enough for you to let your church go through this, it's good enough for me. And I'm not going to jump ship. I'm not going to run. I'm not going to be a coward and go find... I'm not calling you a coward, Anthony. Don't misunderstand me. But I'm not going to be a coward and go try to find a place that's comfy, where all my creature comforts are met and nobody disturbs my peace of mind. No, this is a battle. It's a battle for souls. This is a time of victory, if you ask me. And the only place I want to be is right there in the midst of it. And if this is Jesus' will for his church, so be it. That's where I'm going to be. That's where you'll find me. And I hope that we find you there as well, Anthony.
I appreciate it. And people like you, and, there's good priests in my diocese that kind of give me hope. So
our help and our hope is in the name of the Lord, not in popes, not in radio personalities, not in, it's in Jesus. And as long as you're with Jesus and you stick it out and you're there at your post, it's going to be fine. In the end, it's going to be fine.
Cool. Thanks, Patrick. That helps. I appreciate you, man.
I'm glad, Anthony. Hang in there, man. You can join me by listening to The Patrick Madrid Show on the Relevant Radio app, live each weekday at 8 to 11 a.m. And thanks for listening.